Hi, I am Phil Bowling-Dyer, and I serve as a senior trainer with MELD, Multi-Ethnic Leadership Development. I have the privilege of having a conversation today with two very gifted leaders. Dr. Orlando Crespo serves as the National Director of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship's Latino Fellowship, which includes 2,500 Latino students and 70 campus ministers nationwide. He travels extensively developing Latino student leaders, training ministers, and speaking on college campuses on multi-ethnic diversity, cross-cultural ministry, and leadership. He is an executive leader of the Latino Leadership Circle in New York City and serves in the CMA Metro New York District Executive Committee. Orlando, it's a pleasure having you here.
Great to be here with you.
Excellent. Joanne Acevedo has been a missionary with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship for over 30 years, serving in various roles. Her current role is Associate Director for the Latino Fellowship Department. Joanne also delights in serving as an associate pastor at her church, Liquid Church in New Jersey. She is, in addition, a chaplain with Corporate Chaplaincy of America. Joanne's passion is for people to take their next steps towards Jesus and to grow into how God intends them to be. Joanne, pleasure having you here.
Same to me. It's a pleasure to be with both of you.
Yes, and as a side note, I happen to know these people, and they're very good people. And I'm excited about having this conversation with them. So, enough of me, more of you. So tell me, we're talking about Latino culture, Latino families, and Latino you. So start off, what is an early experience where you began to think of yourself as a leader? Joanne, please lead us off in this discussion.
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me because it wasn't in the formal setting of what meant for me to be a leader, but yet it was within my family. And I think I've been contemplating this. I remember when I was 16, there probably was earlier experiences of being a leader, but I was 16 when my father passed away. And my mother just turned to me and said, "Can you take care of the arrangements?" So as her oldest, I had to take on the whole responsibility of taking care of the whole funeral service, of talking to a vendor, of going to speak to the family, picking out clothing, all of the gamut of what it meant to do a funeral and preparation. That was my first, I found myself as one of my early experiences as a leader, and to take responsibility of something that was very precious in my family. And I had to take on the leadership of the eldest child, yet also be there for my mom in that process of what does it mean to be leading in that process of my family. So
Wow.
as I think of that question, I think about it wasn't in a formal setting of a business, or it was within my family, what it meant for me to be the leader in that way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Orlando, how would you answer that question? An early experience thinking of
Yeah, I
yourself
think
as a leader.
sure. I think for me, it was probably junior high school. I grew up in a family of there was five of us. I was the middle child. So actually, in my family, I didn't have a lot of opportunity. I think, like Joanne, to lead. I had an older brother and sister who did that. I had parents. So it really wasn't until I got to junior high school that my guidance counselor began to see some potential in me. I didn't see it in myself, but somehow he saw it in me and invited me to be on the student council with my junior high school. And I thought it was strange. I didn't know what that was about and what leaders did, but I was open and willing to kind of step into that. And then the other thing as well that happened maybe a year later was I joined the football team for our junior high school and became kind of the backup quarterback for our team. We had a great team because we had a great first string quarterback, not because of me. But I remember as a second string quarterback, I had to learn all the plays. There were times that I was put in and I had to be ready to go. And so, yeah, I just learned a work ethic as a leader of getting to practices earlier and working harder and being prepared. And there were luxuries I didn't have that my teammates had because I made a bigger commitment as a leader, as a quarterback. Yeah.
Sure. Great, great. Thank you for both of you for giving us a window into your own lives as a leader. Tell us to pull the curtain back a little ways. Orlando, why don't you start with this question? So,
Yeah,
what did the landscape look like for Latino leaders when you started, and then maybe some things about how it has changed since then?
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, when I first started, this was probably, late 80s, early 90s.
Hmm.
I remember, and I'm referring to some of my Christian circles.
Sure, sure.
I was part of this national Latino Evangelical Coalition, and I was on the board for them. And I remember uh, we were part of this. It was called the Evangelical Immigration Table, and it was basically a bipartisan group of Christians and politicians. They weren't all Christians.
Hmm.
Um, Committed to humane immigration reform.
Sure.
And so it felt like it was an easier time where there were Christians politically on both sides that we were united on certain things. Whether you were progressive or conservative in your politics. And so I remember that it was easy to think about humane immigration reform as something that was necessary and needed and even biblical. And so when I think of now in terms of the landscape, it's very different. It's like you can't even sometimes even as Christians we can't decide if caring for the immigrant is a good thing or a bad thing. That's how in many ways how much it's changed. And so yeah, I feel like as a Latino leader dealing with some of these issues like immigration, it's become just more complex, more complicated, more landmines as a leader that we have to kind of manage and work through.
Hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much. Joanne, how
Right.
would you answer the same question? What was the landscape like when you moved up in for Latino leaders, and how has it changed?
Yeah, so I think in light of what Orlando just shared about immigration, it actually, I think my answer solidifies that a little bit more. I found
Hmm.
myself as a leader when I first started off. Um, I think that the ability to lead was only in the margins and not in the center, right? Because
Hmm.
who I was, who the what the landscape was, who was having the opportunities to sit at a table to lead. And so leading from the margins, I recall one time I was told by a teacher that I would never amount to anything, which was something marking for me, but then I was going to prove her wrong, right? That would become the place for me to say, no, this will not be what she said of me. And yet I had my parents saying, you're going to be great, you're going to do wonders, right? So there's this constant struggle between the two of my people telling me I could do something, where I have a white teacher or someone from a different
Mhm.
ethnicity who tells me no. And so I learned what it meant to lead, but lead in the margins, which meant that I led mostly in church and not in the world itself, right? So I began to find my place and footing within the church to find place to lead. And I was, for the most part, was leading in the landscape of a Spanish speaking church. And I found myself that finding the ability to lead there was safer. Yet
Mhm.
in some ways, I felt like I was in the margins because I wasn't at the center of where people were making decisions for a large denomination and stuff, things like that.
Sure,
But
sure.
what I think what has changed is if I look at the landscape, there is a difference of where Latinos are making influence. And it's not just in the church, but there's other places where influence has been beginning to change and take shape. And so there are many still that are doing it from the margins and not being at the center of things, but there has been a movement for people to enter into those places, to begin to speak
Mm.
in into those places. And I think that as we become more diverse in our country, in the sense of how we get information, how we interact with others, that has in some ways not not helped for us to be at the margins, but pushing us to push towards and say, no, we will not be ignored in the process of leading. Um,
Mm.
and I would say for myself, who I'm no longer in a Latino church, I'm actually in a very diverse church. That's on purpose. And I think that that also has made the difference that many Latinos have left the ethnic specific church to move to a church that's a much
Hmm.
more diverse, and there has been some inroads in very different ways.
Gotcha, gotcha. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
So, so I know the both of you as very gifted leaders and had the privilege and opportunity to work alongside you on different projects and such.
Mhm.
Describe to me some of the process that got you there. Think of a stretch assignment, something that pushed you outside your comfort zone. I'm going to ask Joanne for you to go first on this one. Something that
Mhm.
significantly shaped your leadership as a Latino leader. What was it, and what did you learn from it? Joanne, your thoughts.
Yeah, I could share a more recent story because I think it's been evident for me on how that's shaped me. I recently was asked to be a part of our National Staff Conference leadership team, which
Mhm.
is a conference that
Mhm.
InterVarsity does for all of the organization. If you were to ask someone who was I was probably underneath the radar where people knew of me, but I was not exposed in a way that was my leadership was, oh, look, she's doing that. And so I knew that in that way I was in a stretch assignment. And I had I
Mhm.
think at that point I felt like there is something here that I only not only is this a stretch assignment for me, but it's for the people I represent. There was in my mind, those two things were coming into play. And I remember that one of the major things we talked about at this conference was one of the values that we hold as Latinos, which is now I'm going to forget the value, but I know it, the value. Look at me
Mhm.
right now. Um, but gozar la vida, I knew it would come to me, which gozar la vida means it's a sense of what does it mean to still in the midst of sorrow, still have joy in life. Now, here's a
Yeah.
central value for my people, and we have now taken it to be a part of this conference. I
Mm,
was really in a place of being exposure. And how do then I train people? That was part of
sure.
all the different things of this stretch assignment. I had to not just keep a curtain and keep it private, which I could tend to do, right? And say, this is my people. I'm not going to let you in. I had to let that be open, also let to be exposed of this beautiful cultural experience and bring it to the center of the
Mhm.
organization. So I think that the stretch assignment not only did it help me to have more of a voice, but also to say, here's what I bring to the table that if you don't have me at the table, you would miss out.
Hmm.
So it was
Hmm.
a stretch assignment for myself, but
Uh-huh.
also for what it meant for my community that I represent. This
Right.
is what you would miss if we weren't at the table. This is what you would not have. And so I'm really grateful for this stretch assignment because it did help me to uh, continue to experience our organization as safe, right? Because
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why sometimes we shelter and we will not let you in, is because we are afraid. What will you do with what I share? What would you do if my leadership is different? What would you do if this is? And so that helped for me to be able to enter and expose something that's so beautiful of our culture that actually resonated with a lot more people of different communities, and it gave verbiage and language to something that is probably an experience that other cultures have had.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Wow. Deep insight that benefited so many other
Mhm.
people, that stretch assignment. Orlando, how would you share? What is a stretch assignment that you had, something that put you outside your comfort zone, that shaped your leadership? What was it, and what did it do for you?
In 19, was it 1999, I was an area director for a university here in New York City. And it was at that point where we were having some national gatherings of Latino staff with our vice president, Sam Barkat. You might remember him. And yeah, and what happened was, I think at that meeting in particular, the need for leadership became very prominent and very needed for Lafayette to move forward. And so out of those conversations, I ended up becoming the first national Lafayette director for InterVarsity. And that was a stretch assignment because I wasn't looking for a national position. I was happy where I was. I was having enough complexities as an area director in New York City. That was hard enough for me. And to think nationally felt like this is way over the top for me. But as I prayed about it, as I talked to people who knew me, it felt like it was a good next step for me. And so I stepped into that. I think part of the the stretch as well was that there was no infrastructure for that position. I was the first national director. Um, we had no leadership. There was really no culture yet in terms of our identity as a ministry. We were just a ministry in name, really. Uh, and so there was a lot to do in stepping into that. And so part of what I did early on was I tried to develop a sense of culture by developing our first national LaFe student conference in 2004. I put together a leadership team, which interestingly enough, Joanne Acevedo was one of my first leaders on that national team. And she had a lot to do with really how LaFe got rolled out and developed in those early years. And even now, she's continued to have influence. Um, and then, yeah, so there was, like I said, there was a lot to do. Uh, and I think it was very humbling for me because it was very lonely. I was the only leader initially. And then my supervisor, my VP who hired me was also leaving at the time. So I felt very alone. And the thing that really helped me was to put that leadership team together. People like Joanne and Brad Bertelson and Jen Ball and Sandra Van Opstel were amazing leaders. And so I think early on with the stretch leadership thing, I realized leadership is not something you do alone. You can, and you'll have some success, but there's real wisdom in depending and leaning into the strengths of others. And I really learned that early on. I felt like it was, an important lesson for me to learn at the very beginning. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Both of you, thank you very much. And Orlando, your last comment leads me to my next question, and I'd like for you to answer this question first. You gave advice, things that you had learned from your stretch assignment about leaning into other people's strengths as a team. So if you could go back and give your younger self one or two pieces of advice about navigating leadership as a Latino, what would that advice be, Orlando?
Sure. I think as a young leader, it's very easy to feel like you can't make any mistakes. It feels like everything is riding on every single decision. And I wish I would have been a little bit more relaxed, right? I mean, part of being a leader is you're going to make mistakes. In fact, it's out of those mistakes that some of your biggest lessons in life and in leadership happen. So I would have told my younger self, listen, just relax, be yourself, enjoy the leadership journey more, right? And so there was a level of nervousness and anxiety in those early years that in many ways were unnecessary, you know. And so I wish I could go back and when I think of my other colleagues who are non-Latino, I look at some of my white colleagues who made many mistakes, but they learned from them. They kind of picked themselves up. They went forward. But I didn't feel like I had that luxury as a Latino leader. I felt like, there's something about in your head thinking you represent your entire people, right? I was representing the entire Puerto Rican people in the world, and it's easy to feel like if I make a mistake, that's there's going to be a negative connotation to who we are, and my colleagues didn't experience that, so they were able to kind of make mistakes, brush themselves off, move forward, and keep progressing in their leadership. And so, yeah, I wish I would have done that differently because I did make mistakes, and maybe needed to make more mistakes to become even a more competent leader. But I felt like I was so careful that it ended up being to my detriment as a leader, not to my benefit. Yeah.
Great advice. Good advice. Joanne, you're talking to a young Latina who is stepping up in her leadership, and she's you. What are one or two pieces of advice you would give her in navigating her leadership as a Latina? What would it be?
Yeah, so as I think of this question, I actually think of what I tell my daughters, right? Because I have four daughters. And I think about as I see them navigating, what does it mean to be a Latina woman in leadership? Many of them, and all of them are in a different sector of work. And I've told them, be true to who you are. what defines you is not what others say of you, right? Don't let what others say of you be the one that defines you. Who you are comes from what your father and I have taught you, what you are have learned from what you have seen in scripture, because that's what we base ourselves off. But that's who you are, and that centeredness of that, what does that mean? And so for me, I knew that that was the place for, I heard so many other voices of telling me who I was and who I wasn't. And so to be able to remind my daughters that they are seen, they are known, they are who they are because of who God made them to be or who they are. The gifts that they bring are good gifts. And I think the other piece of advice is get the mentor you need. Because at least for me, that's actually what's helped me navigate through all the different transitions of leadership that I've had, is having different types of mentors. And I would say mentors that actually come to different aspects of my life. So I have a mentor that meets to meet with me about what does it mean to be a mom. I have a mentor that meets with me, what does it mean to be a Latino leader, right? I have different aspects of types of mentors that actually help navigate the complexity of who my life is. And so I always say that to young leaders, who are the people speaking into you? Because I had those. And I tell that to my daughters. I say that to them, who's speaking into you that's not just me, that who else is building you to the person you are to be as a Latino leader, which I think is really important.
Excellent, excellent. Such wisdom, such wisdom. Oh my gosh. Most of wisdom. And let me catch a couple of those for myself. My gosh. Okay, so you have spoken to, you've given advice and as a Latino to Latinos. Now, for the rest of us that also want to benefit from this, oh, wise Latino leaders, what are one or two things, and Joanna, we'll start with you. What are one or two things you wish non-Latino leaders understood about the Latino experience? One or two things for the rest
I
of
think,
us to learn from.
yeah, I think one thing that always comes to mind is we are a loyal people. And that is actually something that is beneficial. And the reason for that for me is because if you see us and value who we are, we're going to be loyal. And sometimes it's to our detriment, which I think sometimes it is towards our detriment because we like to stay and do like loyal to the company, loyal to the person, loyal to, even if it's to the detriment of everyone else, we're going to be loyal. And I think that that's actually something really important for non-Latino leaders to know and understand, that it comes from a place of when we are seen, when we are appreciated, we will be loyal and we will stick with you. We're not going to leave you. We're going to be there. And I think that that's something, the undervalue of anybody that will make you will see that person leave. But as soon as you start to value what they bring to the table, that's one thing. The other thing I would say to be understood is there are different ways of leading. We might not lead in the same way that you do. And so, right, you might have 10 steps to know how to fix that puzzle. I could probably do it in 15 and it is okay, because I might get someone else to do it with me and that's okay, right? Just because I ask someone else to collaborate with me, it might be that I have a value of community. So can I be okay to lead in that format? Because we might have more fun. Maybe your way might not be as fun, right? So I think that that process, let the process continue and don't get caught up with the process of it's not being done like it should be. Actually, it might be a different way. So I always talk about it's a prism. You see it in through a prism, you might see it in a different way. I'm looking at it through a different direction of the prism, and I might be seeing it in a different way. So allow us to have the space. I think when we confine things for time and this has to be done in a particular time, that then doesn't allow for the creativity that maybe a Latino might have and a non-Latino might want it in a particular time frame. So those are the two things I think of.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Orlando, same question. One or two things you wish non-Latino leaders understood about the Latino experience.
Well, I just want to affirm what Joanne said about the loyalty, because you're looking at two people, you're interviewing two people right now that have been within a varsity 30 plus years.
Sure. Okay.
And Joanne and I have been working together for most of those years. And
Interesting.
so the level of loyalty that Joanna's had towards me as La Fed director, towards InterVarsity,
Mhm.
she's a living example of that. And so, and there was a study that was done years back that tried to look at, what's the difference? Is there anything different about Latino leadership? And they found that there was really nothing very, in terms of with other cultures. The only thing that was different was the level of loyalty.
Interesting.
And so that people, if they're treated well, if they're treated with respect and with honor, if Latinos are treated with respect, they stick around because for them, it's more important to have a great boss that they're committed
Mhm.
to, that respects
Mhm.
and loves them, than, like Joanne said, to move on to a promotion,
Mhm.
where there might be uncertainty, right, for another job. So
Mhm.
I just want to affirm what Joanne said. My two would be that it seems like this might be juxtaposed, but bear with me. One is that Gabriel Salguero, who's the president of NALEC, National Latino Evangelical Coalition, talks about the fact that politically we're not a monolith, right? We're not all Republican. We're not all Democrat. We span so many countries, and from Central and South America and the Caribbean. Some of our foods are very different. Even some of our idioms in Spanish are different. And so you've got to be careful as a leader supervising Latinos that you don't make assumptions that every Mexican is like every Puerto Rican and every Puerto Rican is like every Cuban. My wife is Cuban. I can tell you, her and I are very different from me as a Puerto Rican. So that's just a very important thing that we're not all the same. We're very different in many ways. There is another thing I think in terms of loyalty, yes, but I think another thing that really does unite us that's similar is the fact that we look at life through the lens of our family, right? We look at promotion, we look at ministry, we look at community, often through the lens of extended family, not just our immediate family. And so, if you want your Latino those that you're leading to respect and love you and work
Mhm.
hard for you, respect and honor their families and give dignity to that. And so that means that if somebody in their family is sick and they need half a day off, that you're quick to say yes, go, you know.
Mhm.
And then maybe you even go to the hospital with them. Like things that say, I care for you. Because if you do that and you show love as they're trying to care for their family, that is you will garner a high level of integrity and respect
Mhm.
from Latinos. And that's just not just Latinos, many cultures are like that, right? So I'm
Mhm.
not trying to say that we're the only Latino specific kind of ethnicity, but it is also very true of Latinos. And so even with the Latin ministry, before we do any work, we're talking about our families, where do we
Mhm.
need prayer, what's going on, and we're tracking with each other because our families matter to us. We're not just individuals. We're part of an extended community with our families, with our churches, and that matters to us. And so I'd say that's my advice is you're not just working with a leader, you're also working with a leader who cares for their family, and what are ways that you can care for that family as well. So
Orlando,
Excellent.
to that statement, it's the element of active presence, which we would have
mhm.
a great deal. So that
Yeah.
active presence, that ministry of presence is something in the Latino culture that's really important. And
Yeah.
and to ask, what are the presence, what does it mean for me to be active presence for you in this situation? What
Mhm.
does it mean for me to stand with you? That means a lot to a Latino in the process
Mhm.
because you are goes back to being seen in the process. I am not
Yeah.
just a widget that does what you need me to do, but I'm
Mm.
actually part of you see me as part of the fabric of what needs to
Mhm.
get done. And so
Mhm.
Mhm.
that goes along with that.
Hmm.
That's right.
Excellent. Excellent. Gifted leaders, as we close, do you have any final thoughts, final comments, things you've said that you want to reiterate, or please?
Yeah. Yeah, I think leadership is a journey. what I've tried to do in my leadership is to continue to grow as a leader. Uh, and so you don't want to feel like you've arrived and now you're competent enough. But and I think I've learned this from the Black community, right? Often you hear from Black leaders that you've got to be 2 times better than your white, or as good as your white colleagues, because we do live in uh, a bigoted, sometimes racist country, right? That's real, and so you've got to work really hard. So I worked hard at getting my doctorate of ministry. I got my ordination, my ministerial license. Those are things that I felt like these are necessary, because I've got to always be proving my competencies to non-Latinos. And so leadership is something that you're always growing and always developing, always learning new things to continue to be a better leader, and to not feel like you've arrived and you're done and that's enough. So I feel like I'm always learning and growing, or trying to, in my leadership.
Sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Joanne, any thoughts as we close?
Yeah, I think as Orlando was talking about growing in leadership, what does that look like? And I think for each of us, we have different ways of learning. And so what I would say, to back to what Orlando said, for some, that might be the option to get further education. But what does it look like for you to maybe get a mentor that's someone who's of a different ethnicity? Maybe it's to read a book that has something to do with a different ethnicity, right? How do we grow our margins for what is could be of a different experience? And I find that that actually, to me, helps the ability to, what does it mean to grow yourself as a leader? Maybe that is time to say, oh, maybe there is a different way of how to lead. And what does that look like? How do I invite that person into that process to lead differently with me? And so I think that our humility in the process, to not think that we've arrived and we've got everything all squared away, but what does it mean to invite someone in? Because to say, I don't know everything, I want to understand a little bit differently. I think that to me is a gift when I am able to invite people into that space with me, and to say, I don't know everything, but I want to invite you in with me, and to walk alongside, so that there is a different type of learning. And I think it's in the learning. It's we talk about this in InterVarsity. It's in the debrief that there's the learning. And so I have found myself constantly going back to, when I'm in these places of stretch assignments or places like that, what's the learning that I've got for myself? What's the learning that I've done in this process, so that I could then become a better leader as I move forward? Where is it that I need to continue to grow? So those are my thoughts. I think that there is a place of leaders never arrive. We're always moving. That's why people follow us. And so I think as a leader who thinks that they've arrived, then you've not have a following anymore, right? So I think that that's important for us to think about that.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you both. It is a pleasure to have this conversation with two gifted, caring, competent, growing, organic, wonderful leaders. Orlando Crespo, Joanne Acevedo, thank you very much. I am Phil Bowling-Dyer, and I work with MELD, Multi-Ethnic Leadership Development. Thank you for joining us.